All right, we will get started just to be respectful of everybody's time and because we probably have too much to say today. Thank you all for joining us today for another honest conversation. This time we're focusing on how to disconnect both from work and from technology. We hope it will be a robust conversation and we invite you to participate as you're comfortable. Please feel free to put comments and questions in the chat and I will make sure to look for them. I'm Nikki Irish, the Outreach and Education Coordinator of the DC Bar Lawyer Assistance Program. Today we have joining us Jesse Jochum, Senior Counselor, also with the Lawyer Assistance Program. And then we have two wonderful volunteers, LAP volunteers, Bill and Danielle. And I'm gonna give them a brief moment to introduce themselves. Bill, since you're off mute, I'll let you go first, and then Danielle, you can hop in.
Hi, well, I'm Bill Mayer. I have been in the DC bar since 1996 and in private practice, working for the government. And throughout my career, I have found that disconnecting has been a real challenge. And it's something that I have thought about almost every week of my career. So it's a pleasure to be here to talk about it.
Good afternoon, Danielle Hart. I am a LAP volunteer as well. I am in-house counsel at Lockheed Martin, also CEO of Mindful Esquire, LLC, and disconnecting to me, I mean, it's a part of my mindful practice, so very intentional about it, and it is so needed and necessary in our profession. Thank you both for being here.
And then just as a quick reminder, the Lawyer Assistance Program is here for you. It's a free and confidential It offers free and confidential individual and group support as well as educational programming for your organization. And like we mentioned, we also have some wonderful LAP volunteers who are happy to provide support as well. With that, we're just going to jump in because I think we have a lot to talk about today. And I'm going to actually start with the volunteers. So maybe Danielle, I'm going to throw it to you since you talked about disconnection being part of your practice. What I want to start with maybe is kind of what does disconnection mean to you? And maybe what isn't it for you?
Okay, so disconnecting for me is actually being away from my device because if I hear it vibrate, ring, it's just a natural reaction. I'm going to be looking at it. So whether it's a separate room, whether it's off, being away from my device, and what it's not for me is having my device in the same room and being on do not disturb, because I will just pick it up. It's like this, particularly during the pandemic, I don't know. It's like this automatic thing. If my phone's there, I just pick it up and look at it. And so do not disturb or not, I'm looking at it. So it is removing physically the technology from my space, whether I'm from a room, just removing it. So that is disconnecting for me.
Thanks. So the physical separation is kind of
necessary for me, yes.
You learned, right? You've lived, you practiced, you've learned. How about for you, Bill?
I think of it that way, and I also think of it as just maybe a little more broadly, sort of just carving out time where you can do something other than practice law or think about law and, either have fun or do a good job at that other thing. And that, that includes getting away from your device and then maybe just sort of changing your mindset.
I love that. So also it is about being more than just the attorney, right? It's disconnecting from that part of yourself and connecting to a different version of yourself or part of yourself. Jesse, what do you notice?
I would say the number one thing disconnecting is about, it's a little bit of what Danielle says and Bill says. It's, getting away from the work, other aspects of your life and doing something that brings you pleasure, allows you to decompress from your day, that kind of pours back into you everything that you've already given out throughout the day. The one thing I would highlight, though, is it is important for us to disconnect, but making sure that we're not using disconnecting as a sole way to cope with life stressors or difficult emotions. Because if we're always disconnecting, then we're not really disconnecting for well-being. We're more disconnecting as avoidance. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a healthy balance between disconnecting to really take care of ourselves and disconnecting because we're trying to avoid something we don't want to deal with.
Mute.
Ding, the button didn't work. Jesse, if you can also maybe talk a little bit about why are we so connected, right? Danielle kind of mentioned the pandemic, which I think probably has pressure cooked all sorts of connection everywhere. But maybe kind of what's going on with why we're so connected and why we struggle with stopping so much.
I mean, the best analogy I always tell people is we use technology, similar to way people sometimes can use substances. We use it as a way to make us forget, to numb, to feel better. It's going to operate and activate that same reward system in our brains. The same way drugs does, the way gambling, food, it's going to give us that reward system. So it does have it does not have the same body addiction as drugs and alcohol does. It still operates, still triggering that part of our brain. So that is what makes it so addictive. And let's face it, Danielle's right. Technology is the way during the pandemic that really allowed us to connect to work, it allowed us to socially connect with loved ones who may have been in different part of the city, and allowed kids to do school. And it was our form of entertainment. To say after the pandemic, we were just going to switch that off, it wasn't going to happen, So I think while we were already going that way, I think the pandemic definitely sent that into hyperdrive.
Thank you for that. And also something you kind of mentioned earlier was people also maybe using it as a way to manage emotions, which I think is really important that we'll kind of talk about probably for the next 45 minutes and touch on in different ways. I'm curious for Danielle or Bill, was there like a point where they noticed they were too connected and like what caused them to shift?
I can go. So again, during the pandemic, I noticed when I was too connected because my focus was being impacted. That's when, when you're going into the office, you go to a meeting, you focus on that meeting, an hour, 2 hours, you're focused. In the pandemic, I would be in a meeting, but Skype would be going off, Teams would be going off, my email would be going off, my phone, like everything's going off. And then I would then start addressing things. And at some point I realized that I'm not paying attention to anything, and that's impacting my focus. And as mindfulness is important, so meditating, all that kind of brought me back to being able to get my focus to where it was. But I noticed through my focus, because then in my personal life, it was showing up too. My attention span was shorter, and that's where the technology then continued to spiral, because they feed us things in bits in the social media, and then it was starting to draw me in. So it was a overall, like, what is going on with my focus that kind of had me try to get to the solution. And I was like, it's this technology thing. It's too much is stimulating me in every moment. So that was how I was able to recognize what was going on. And it was definitely during the pandemic.
Yeah. So focus for you.
Yes.
It's funny. One of my family gave me an iWatch several years, during the pandemic. And I thought, well, this is just great. And I had set it so that every time either a text or an email came in, it would, haptic setting would buzz. And it was starting to drive me crazy. I mean, it's sort of like I wanted to take that thing and throw it into the Potomac River a little bit, and I was using it. I felt like I was on top of stuff. And then I thought, well, is it serving me or am I serving it? And I don't use the iWatch anymore. It was sort of this kind of vivid experience for me. It was weird.
It sounds like you kind of had the physical kind of manifestation of that, right? Like it was constantly pulling your attention physically,
Yeah.
because it was buzzing or whatever it was, like you were getting the notifications, right?
Yeah. And I was I was starting to worship this little thing that was on my wrist. And it's sort of like, no, it's surely I can control this better. And I know I probably could have done better at how I work with it. But it also was just kind of a warning signal that maybe I was getting a little bit too into the wanting to be on top of things all the time kind of thing, which is pretty common, I think, for a woman.
What I really liked you said is essentially like, am I serving it or is it serving me? Right? I mean, am I serving it or is it serving me? I'm saying that again just to everybody to hear it, right? And Jesse, I think that kind of connects into Like, how does constant connectivity affect, like our mental health, our well-being, and are there long-term consequences if we're struggling to disconnect regularly?
I mean, I think Bill just kind of paved the way for what I'm about to say. I mean, simple fact is the constant connection has been shown to increase rates of anxiety, depression. It also causes some physical manifestation from, again, the constant screen times, migraine headaches, eye strains. And let's face it, most of the time when we're connected, we're sitting in a fixed seat or bed or some kind of thing for a long period of time. So that means body aches, eye strains, limited physical activities, and also unfortunately sleep and weight problems because we're so connected. And not only those physical and mental aspects, we got to think about the social aspect of what that constant from social media, emails, all of those, how's that impacting our own self-image, body image? Is that increasing feelings of perfectionism, FOMO, fear of missing out, because we constantly have to see what the other person is doing, what this other person might be doing in their personal life, their careers. So it just activates so much of those emotions. And from an attorney perspective, I definitely hear clients all the time, especially law students, it's that constant feeling of comparison. Perfectionism definitely gets increased. We have the aspects of, that revenge scrolling because I've been working connected to my work so long. I'm going to keep this time for myself, but then I'm staying up 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because this is the only time I have to be connected to. Again, it's still technology. Yes, I'm not working, but I'm also utilizing technology in a healthy way. So then you have the issue of long-term burnout and diminished capacity because you're not taking care of yourself.
For maybe Danielle, how is there anything for you? You talked about the focus, and you noticed how the focus was affecting you both personally and professionally. Um, are there any other ways, just maybe even with colleagues, like that you have seen it show up maybe impactfully?
Colleagues.
It's okay.
No, I think what's coming up immediately is just how I communicate. So, and I know phone is still technology, but it is so much because there's so much communication, so much coming through technology. It's way easier to shoot out a quick message versus pick up a phone, and a lot is lost within that. So I've noticed losing the value of the cooler talk, even in the virtual world. So not the professional relationships not being as impactful because now we're just shooting notes everywhere. And then also, and I think this happens to a lot of attorneys, it gets dangerous because you start advising in Skype and in Teams and you get a little bit more, I don't want to say less professional, but the language is different. So I've noticed that, and that's something that I'm striving to work on getting better at. And like, well, let's get back to emails. Let's get back to picking up a phone and having a conversation. Issues can be missed. So I definitely noticed that as an impact as well, like being able to practice at the best level and not falling into just the lax nature of I mean, my clients text me now. They never texted me before. Like, can you get this to me? And I'm just like, wow, when did we get to texting? So yeah.
Wow, yeah, that's a great example.
It's interesting too. Jesse mentions maybe like rivalry with other law students or associates or whatever. The funny thing is, one thing I think is a good idea is to, talk to your colleagues. If you're a law student or an associate, talk to your colleagues about this. Sort of, try to support each other. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's kind of like see how everyone is handling stuff like this. And, rather than sources of rivalry, a lot of times your peers can really be sources of strength. And the interesting thing, and Danielle is like spot on. It's kind of like it's a lot easier to do that if you're face to face, at in a social activity or just having lunch somewhere or something like that. A lot easier to be frank and sort of try things out than shooting messages around that somebody can take a screenshot of or archive or something like that. I mean, but yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to talk about things like this with at least your peer group and probably your managers too.
I really like that emphasis because so we had people kind of submit questions they would want answered when they registered. And several people actually talked about how can we, as like colleagues to each other, like support each other in disconnecting from work. So Bill, I just kind of love that you started that conversation on starting the conversation, right? Ideally within your groups, within your peer groups, within your mentors, within your managers, wherever that can exist, wherever there's like a space to start it. And if there are managers on the call or like on the on this, right, is ideally it's coming top down, like, right, ideally you are showing how to support that space on like disconnecting.
Probably not as well as I could have. But and that, that's an issue. Well, it's an issue everywhere. It's certainly an issue in private practice. If there is a very willing associate who wants to work and always be in touch, I mean, they tend to always stay in touch because, senior attorneys will use them a lot. But again, it's up to everybody. Hopefully the senior attorneys are getting educated as to um, some of the downfalls, the pitfalls of always being connected and burnout, and gee, they might lose good people. And hopefully, the more junior lawyers either feel empowered enough or brave enough to talk to their the more senior people about it. But these are the kinds of things that lots of times I think it's hard for sort of tough. We can solve anything lawyers to do easily, but I think it's important.
I love that. That actually makes me think of, so we're gonna shift a little bit in terms of talking about kind of the belief systems and the feelings under all this, the challenges of disconnecting. And Jesse and I were talking recently about a client that I have worked with before. So is a senior many moons ago, but it was kind of a good relevant story, right? So like senior attorney working at a nonprofit, feeling burnt out. And one of the steps they had taken was to recently kind of designate time on Saturdays for a long run. Like it was like the thing they were giving themselves to check out, right? To like feel disconnected. And they wouldn't take their phone. They didn't have the Apple Watch. They were just disconnected, right? For that solid amount of time on a Saturday morning that was very restorative. Right. There's also no chance of seeing a call or an email if you do not have, like Danielle said, physically the technology with you. So there's like starting this practice, they're enjoying this separation, but also struggling a little bit with like the shoulds, like, should I be connected? What if a problem happens? And of course, because this is how the universe sometimes works, like during one of their long runs, like a first year associate that they are supervising calls them, can't get a hold of them because they have designated this time for themselves, and there's like a client crisis, right? Something has to actually happen on the weekend with this client crisis. The senior attorney doesn't find out about it until after they're done their long run, and everything's taken care of, actually. The younger associate reached out to like the boss's boss, right? Because that is where the chain of command was. The client, the legal client got taken care of. Emergency has been dealt with. So it worked, right? The client was able to disconnect. When a crisis happened, the associate knew what to do. They went to the boss's boss. Boss was fine with it. That was like an appropriate, right, path. There were no repercussions except for the internal feelings that my client really struggled with. Like, I should have been the one to deal with this call. I shouldn't be placing this on my boss. Like all of the kind of shoulds and beliefs and thoughts and feelings that they then had to process. And it wasn't actually the like logistics, right? The logistics like were taken care of and approved. It was a feeling of I failed in my responsibilities. And how often those feelings, those anxieties, like actually are a huge barrier to disconnecting from work or phones or technology or whatever it might be. So I just wanted to throw that out there that we see it, right? And Jesse was like, oh yeah, we see this in many different ways. And I guess Jesse, maybe I'm curious kind of what you think about that, like what is going on there? Yeah,
Yeah.
what factors are at play?
As I said, when Nikki said, when we were talking about this, the one thing again, as clinicians, I was so focused on the intense reaction that the individual had, even though everything had gone the way they had planned for it during the runs, but they were so focused on that guilt and shame of not being present. And again, that's where we have to identify, how our anxiety about disconnecting is going to show up. And one of the part as I was preparing for this, I really did some research, and there's actually a terminology for that fear and anxiety of being away from their phone. It's called no phone, no mo FOMO, which is no mobile phone FOMO. And I was like, phobia. I'm sorry, phobia. And I was just like, wow, there's actually a terminology for fears of being without the mobile device. And I always tell people, again, we're not talking about getting rid of the anxiety. Again, I'm sure when he started doing this self-care habit, that he had a lot of anxiety regarding it. So we're not saying that, oh, you shouldn't have that anxiety. Acknowledge that anxiety. But one of the things that this person did was they implemented strategies to address the anxiety. It wasn't going to disappear, but it did help decrease it. But the next work is, how do I deal with this guilt and shame that it doesn't keep him from not doing that run, or from our other clients I work with not turning off their phone at 7 o'clock at night because just in case a work email comes.
Mhm. So clearly there's some societal pieces. We now have a term for it, right? Like it's becoming the zeitgeist. Yes, right. It's slightly scary that there's a name for it.
So can I
I'm curious.
add something? So it's interesting because I think all like anxiety, all that stuff comes from fear, and then if you pull the thread to survival and then death, right? Like just
Yeah.
but it goes to that, right? Like if I don't answer my call, or and I don't do well, then then I don't show up the way I want to show up, and then I get fired, and then I'm on the streets, and then I'm dying. And it's like it's this survival thing. And I remember I had this once in a lifetime experience to go on this meditation retreat in Mount Kilimanjaro. And right before I took off, there was this position that they came out there, like, you have to apply for it, like, etc. And then I was like, sure, like, I'll find service in somewhere on Mount Kilimanjaro, and I'll prepare on this meditation retreat. That's a once in a lifetime experience. And I hung up the phone and I was like, what did you just do? Why did you do that? And then I ultimately emailed them back, and I was like, you know what, this is really important to me. This is for my mental well-being, and I'm not going to be able to apply for this job. One, what happened, they actually prolonged leaving the rec open. So I was actually able to come back and still apply for the job. I didn't get the job, but okay, I'm still here, I'm alive. But that, just jumping into that, sure. And it's like, why would I literally sat down like, why would you do that? No part of you wants to be preparing for an interview nor finding service, and you don't even know if you can find service on Mount Kilimanjaro. So I just wanted, when you were saying that, it's so dramatic, but it does come back to the survival, and which is like that, like if I don't answer this phone call, and we just automatically go to this worst case scenario, whether we know we're doing it or not. So I just want to share that.
No, I love that example, right? Like there's like external expectation that was happening. I expect you to apply for this job, even though you're not going to be here. And then this internal, like, I have to apply, like, I have to say yes.
Yeah.
Right. And it was the pause afterwards that let you actually reevaluate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a great example. Yeah. Mount Kilimanjaro is a long ways away, but it's yeah. But, and back to the person on the long run. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of, if he actually set it up so that the more junior attorney knew what to do, and his boss knew, oh, every once in a while, if I'm on a Saturday morning, you can be pretty sure I'm disconnected. I mean, if he did what he could to manage it, then I understand the feelings, but man, he won. He should embrace the victory, sort of. And if the others were flexible enough to say, oh, okay, we can handle it, no problem. he's usually good about this. That's great too. I mean, the bad thing is if the boss says, where were you? Or I can't believe this
Yes.
happened. But you can sort of handle that maybe with communication, maybe. So, but yeah, I completely understand those feelings. All these feelings. I mean, yeah, you want to be on top of things all the time, and you can't do that.
Going to connect to kind of one of the questions we have on here is this idea, right? We are in a world where work follows us everywhere, right? Like it can follow us to Mount Kilimanjaro if we want. Like it can, maybe it like follows us everywhere, right? For maybe starting with the volunteers and then Jesse chime in what you found effective or effective with clients, but like what are some strategies you would suggest to people who are just kind of just starting to put their toe into this idea that I need to disconnect more? What have you found effective for like tolerating the discomfort and working to set those boundaries? If you have.
Well, I'll just say that I have found that if there is some other pursuit, and I mean, long distance run as an example, I hike some and all. If there's some other pursuit that I really love, it makes it a little easier to disconnect. It just, not disconnecting just for the sake of disconnecting. Maybe that's a good thing, but boy, there's nothing like doing something I'm really interested in and saying, oh, this is terrific. Oh, yeah, I better check my emails when my hour or 2 hours doing that is finished. And that's a search too. I mean, I remember there was a saying from people used to say in big law. It was kind of like, look, you can practice in a big law firm and maybe do one other thing, and that's a little scary when you hear that. And maybe it's true and maybe it's not true. What I do know is that if you have an interest that you really want to explore, you give that interest some credit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Go into it and see where it leads
Mm-hmm.
you to. And that's a way to help you make disconnecting a little bit easier.
I love that. Like value, right? Something that I value, something that is worth it.
That's important to me or important to my family, and that you feel good about. So
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I'll add on to that. And dipping your toe in, it's just a matter of going through what the runner went through and realizing, okay, I can take this time and then everything will be okay. Like we just kind of have to have those moments where we put ourselves in that scary place of I'm going to disconnect, and then we go back to our phone and it's like, oh wait, everything is okay. I'm still here. I'm still alive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I love what Bill said, because it is easier to do that for something that you're passionate about.
Yeah.
And then it's like versus nothing at all, right? Because then it doesn't feel like it's worth it, because even if there is a fire, you can be like, well, yes, there's a fire. Yes, I have to handle it, but at least I made my daughter's recital, So I like the both. You kind of just got to do it. But when you do it for something meaningful, at least you can justify it within. And I think once you have enough of those experiences where you made it through and you're still alive, you start to normalize that it's okay to disconnect, that it is actually safe for you to disconnect.
I love that. I love the idea that you could start maybe with something you really value, because it's a little bit easier to make that choice. And then when you've like practiced it and learned that the sky has not fallen, right? Then maybe you try it with actually something that isn't as high stakes for you, or like as high stakes as value, or really is like for yourself too sometimes, right? Like I'm choosing my husband's an attorney. He's very good about choosing the kids, right? Like that they are something he will choose. But if I'm like, maybe you should go out like and do something, or maybe you should just rest. Rest, I think, is one of the hardest things I see with attorneys, right? Because it's like just resting, not actually like doing this other good thing, but just like resting sometimes can actually, I think, be one of the like hardest discomforts to get through. I don't know, Jesse, what are your thoughts?
I'll say definitely the resting, because they're already thinking, man, this 30 minutes on Wednesday, I could have wrote that brief, I could have listened, I could have responded to 10 emails, all the things. But I would say I love what Bill and Danielle said. The one thing I would say, just to kind of piggyback what they said, start small.
Mhm.
Maybe it's disconnecting for 15 minutes. Maybe it's disconnecting for 30 minutes and work through that discomfort. So maybe you're, again, a runner. I'm going to start, you're not going to be running for an hour, hour and a half. If you're just running, you're probably going to run for 30 minutes. Disconnect for 30 minutes. But plan that, be purposeful, and say, this is the time I'm going to disconnect. And put it in your calendar. I'm sure a lot of organizations have shared calendar. Put it in your calendar and say, hey, during this time, I'm not going to be reachable, but send me an email. I'll get back to you. Again, helps to decrease your anxiety, but start small.
What about when it's disconnecting from? So maybe I'm okay. Maybe I've gotten better about disconnecting a little bit from work, but now I'm having trouble. Okay, I can disconnect from work for a couple hours. But now I find that when I'm disconnecting from work, my rest is like doom scrolling. Right? Or I'm just like sitting on the couch watching Netflix and not doing anything else. Which sometimes is useful, but not always. So I guess, right, any thoughts for many of you kind of like, okay, well, now how do I move away a little bit from the technology part?
I think it kind of goes back to, again, the avoidance. While yes, we are disconnected from work, but what are we utilizing these other platforms for? What is it giving us? And how do we feel afterwards? Do we feel better? Do we feel restored? Or do we feel drained? Or do we feel anxious because we just saw this thing that this other person that we know is doing? So what is the feeling that you get afterwards when you're disconnecting? If it's negative, then that's not a healthy form of disconnecting. So it's kind of like connecting with the why. How is this helping me really disconnect? Do I feel better afterwards? If not, again, maybe also another thing, the way I'm thinking, more time about that, is maybe I'm utilizing these, but I'm setting limits. So set a alarm on my phone. So if I'm gonna go on TikTok or Instagram, I got a 30-minute alarm that's gonna go off and says, heck, you've been on this for 30 minutes. Get off. So I still get to enjoy it if it does help me feel a little bit, but I also know I'm not going to get into that 2 hours later, I'm still on it.
Yeah. And Bill touched on this earlier. So I have do something you love every day. That sounds cheesy, but it's really important. Do something you love every day and reclaiming that time where you're not doom scrolling to pour it into whatever that is. And what's interesting when you say avoid it, because I do think we go to technology to avoid what's going on internally. And sometimes if we have to sit in silence, now we have to sit with that. So it's like, well, I don't want to look at what's going on with me. I'd rather get on the phone. So I feel like a way to combat that is like, okay, well, what do you love to do? Have you done it today? And use this newfound time you have because you're not on your device to go do it, go walk, go whatever that is. So that's how I try to find the balance in the actually do something with the time. For me, I am into meditating. So sometimes my time is just being still as well, but just do something you love every day. And now you have more time. We feel like we don't have the time. We're always like, I don't have the time. I'm like, yes, you do. Look at your phone and it will tell you how much time you spent on it. And that is enough time to do something you love. The phone is ruthless with that.
And before, Danielle, can I ask, how long do you meditate and how long did it take you to get to that point?
Oh, so I meditate in the mornings and I meditate for a minimum of 20 to, it can go for 20 to 40 minutes. Now, I have been on this journey for a decade, so I don't expect anyone to sit and do 20 to 40 minutes every day at all. But I'm like, if you can get in 5 days, so I try my best to not look at my phone for the first hour of my day. For one, whatever is in my phone is going to program me for what my day is going to be. So if news pops up, now I may be on edge. I don't even know why, because I looked at whatever murders happened. So I try my best to meditate and set my intentions before I look at any device. And the times that I fail to do that, my day is completely different. So it's one of those things I can't afford to miss out on at this point, because I've seen that. But I'm like, if people could even, wake up and take 5 minutes to kind of just be like, okay, I'm here. This is what I want my day to be like before they touch their phone. But I know a lot of us, I mean, our phones wake us up. So we just pick it up and we're
Right.
activated and stimulated. But that was a long way to answer your question. So about
No, I
sometimes.
thank you so much. It was everything you said was perfect because I hear it all the time for clients. Well, I'm terrible at meditating. My mind keeps wandering to other things. I keep thinking about work. And I was like, I'm not asking you to start with 20 minutes. Start with 5 minutes. Yes, you wouldn't go to a gym and work out and pick up 50-pound weights for an hour. You're going to probably start with a 5 or 10. So why do you think your brain muscle is going to work any differently?
And I love that too, Jesse, like I think sometimes there's this misconception that like I'm doing it wrong because my brain's wandering, right? Like that is part of it. Like your brain wanders and you bring your attention back, right? Like it's like teaching the kid, like you come over here, nope, come back, come back, come back again, right? Like, and you are meditating if you're mindfully meditating, at least if you are doing that, and the practice over time improves. And I guess that this is across the board, right? Like anything we're talking about today it's all practice. It's all starting small. It's giving ourselves like grace and permission not to do it perfectly. I know I just said that. It's giving ourselves grace and permission not to do it perfectly, which is incredibly hard for attorneys to do. And then it's just trying it again, because sometimes it doesn't work the first time and you need to do it differently the next time. And all of that is so simple and so hard, right?
It is, yeah. Yes. It is hard. And I mean the example of, oh gee, I think I'll just watch some video, or I'll watch some sports or something like that. I mean, I like doing that to sort of wind down, but that can't be the only thing. It's just a little too similar to sitting in front of your computer, I mean, you especially, I mean, again, watching some things, my mind wanders and it often wanders back to work. And it's kind of like, I really should be doing something that gets me away from that. And I think meditation is great. I am not a meditator, but my wife is, and she gets lots and lots of benefit from it. And it seems to me one of the tougher things you can learn to do. But boy, I mean, going to a gym, taking a walk. I mean, if you have your pet, go for a little walk play with your pet, things like that. I mean, all those kinds of things can be very, very fulfilling on their own and sort of take you away from the devices. And I will add too, my son, who is in his 30s, uses his phone as an alarm clock, and I have told him for years, don't do that because then your phone's right there. And it's a losing battle. I'll never change his mind, but I certainly don't even like having a device in my bedroom just because it's too tempting to go and check up on things. So I try to do a little bit of the physical separation there too.
Physical separation often, if we're struggling, is like the easiest thing. Like, right, it makes it harder to access.
Yeah, it makes it harder to get out of bed and go look at the phone. But yeah, I'm really of two minds about sort of, watching Netflix as a way out because I enjoy it, and yet somehow I just don't think that gives you as much sort of maybe refreshment as you can get doing some other things. But that's completely unofficial, unprofessional view there. But
I want to make sure, so we have 20-ish minutes, I want to make sure two things kind of for the second portion, because I think we've talked a good amount about how to disconnect it and where it's coming from and what that like really looks like. But one of the biggest things I hear is like this discomfort of stepping away from work, right? I have all of these demands. There is an expectation that I'm going to be on. I was debating in my mind about saying something because my husband's firm's tagline, whatever they call it, is always on, and it makes me want to scream. It's because they have locations all around the globe, so it's like we're always on. But there is something underlying about that I'm like, oh, okay, that's not healthy. Right? So because it does permeate, there's a permeation throughout the legal community, whether you are in a nonprofit, whether you are a solo, whether you are in a big firm, with this expectation that I need to be available. Whether it is to my boss, whether it is to my client, whether it is to a colleague I am mentoring. There's just like this belief system somewhere in there that's maybe starts in law school, maybe starts before. And I guess I want to talk a little bit about like how do we manage those expectations and like the feelings that come with them. Jesse, you want to start clinically and then we can throw it to the volunteers.
Well, I will say this. I think kind of piggybacking off of that slogan is, if you're always on, are you actually present for your clients? I mean, how attentive, how productive, how focused can you be if you're always on? I mean, eventually you're going to be burnt out. Eventually things are going to fall to the cracks because you're not giving yourself that space to really be able to decompress, pour back into yourself so that when you are on, you are available, present, and in the moment. So I think the first thing is acknowledging, yes, especially if you're someone who was at the end where you were very connected, always on, always had a cell phone, respond to emails. I think first of all, as you start to work your way towards disconnecting, there is going to be a level of discomfort. So I think acknowledging that discomfort, giving space to that discomfort, and identifying what you're going to do to manage that discomfort. So if I know I'm going to disconnect for an hour, what's going to help me feel a little less discomfort for that hour? Is it, again, doing something purposeful that I enjoy? Is it setting up things that can make any of the things that I'm worried about not happen? What's going to help manage that discomfort, even if it's not going to make it disappear, but at least manage it. And then what's going to be that thing once I've done that disconnect, what is going to be that thing for me to re-engage back into that task or work that I need to do? So I think acknowledging what's going to help mitigate some of that discomfort, and then how do you re-engage? And how do you start setting the limits and letting other people know boundaries? So once you're going to start that disconnecting, how am I going to communicate that to others? Is it going to be specific? I'm saying, hey, you know what? Around lunch, 2 days a week, I'm actually going to go for a run, so I won't be available. So how am I going to communicate that, and how am I going to reinforce that to others once I start identifying what my disconnect is?
So I love all of that. And particularly how you started, because there is a value proposition that in taking more time for myself, I am going to be more competent as an attorney. And I think reaffirming or affirming that I'm doing this for myself, but there's also value in my work. I'm not less valuable. I'm not providing less of a work product. I'm actually going to be better by taking this time. So I love how you started that way. And so the boundaries, everything that we're afraid of showing up as, and we're in fact, by setting those boundaries, showing up better. So I love how you started. And interestingly enough, for me, in regards to setting boundaries, it took the pandemic. I think for a lot of people, the pandemic was also the great reset, because while technology, I wasn't as connected before because it wasn't as prevalent. I definitely was answering calls at all times of the night. And whenever my client needed me, I had no boundaries. And I didn't even know I didn't have any boundaries until the technology was so much during the pandemic and it was affecting me. And I realized it was affecting my focus. And I was like, wait a minute, I need to set boundaries. But I should have started them before the pandemic, to be honest. And that helps. If someone calls me at 11 o'clock at night, and then right before I go to bed, now I'm stimulated. Now I'm not getting great sleep. Now my brain isn't getting all that it needs so I can perform the best day. So really creating affirmations around, I'm doing this for myself, but a better me is a better lawyer, I think also helps in that conversation. So I really do love how you started with it. It doesn't make you a better lawyer to be on all the time by any means, even though we are told that and rewarded for that. So.
Before, thank you both for that. I just the acknowledgement. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're gonna throw a challenging question out is essentially how do you have a conversation with your boss or to a client? Oh, and what if there are real consequences? Like somebody mentioned losing a client because they didn't respond to them at 9 p.m. So I guess there are two parts to that question, right? Is how do you have that conversation with a boss or a client? And how do you manage when sometimes there are consequences to setting that disconnection boundary?
Well, again, so often you catch, you do better with honey than vinegar. It's probably not the first thing I would talk to a client about, that, oh, by the way, you're never going to get me on Saturday mornings because I'll be off hiking or something. I think as you get into the relationship, you get used to how each other works, that it can come out fairly naturally. And I think that's true with junior lawyers and more senior lawyers. Uh, if a junior lawyer shows they can handle many things, the fact that they're going to be gone for a little bit should not somehow blight their career in a law firm or in-house or anywhere else. So I think, like it or not, most senior attorneys value the heads up that this is how it will be. And if they think that there's something wrong with that, they certainly will tell the more junior attorney. It also just depends on what's going on. I mean, if you're in trial, you're going to be on call all the time. It's just moving too fast. If it's the end of a huge transaction, you are going to be, don't count on getting I'll look for it, but don't count on getting, lots and lots of disconnection time. But those are peaks in a long year of legal practice. In general, I mean, I think being honest with people and being diplomatic about it too is a good thing. And sometimes, if it blows up, that's a terrible thing. That's really hard to live through, but that's also part of life. And hopefully you think about it and have a few backup, the junior lawyer and the senior lawyer ready to do backup. And that's where, again, being in touch with your peers can help. If you're going to be at a wedding or something some weekend, make sure somebody that and trust can cover for you, So a lot of it is advanced planning, and then sometimes things go wrong and you do your best to make it better. That's about all you can do.
Yeah. I agree with everything you said. And I think that's life. Like sometimes it will blow up, and being okay with that. So, and I saw the comment come in, like there are real consequences. It is unfortunate you lost a client, but sometimes a no to others is a yes to yourself. And maybe that relationship with that client was one that was going to be not a fun one, and so maybe you have saved yourself and found more balance in that client no longer being around. So it's also just being like, sometimes honoring myself will result in that, and that's okay. It's life. We don't always win, even though we want to, we don't always win. So it's just one of those, I wish there's a great answer, like you do this. It's like, no, sometimes there will be ramifications for that.
And I mean, we are lawyers. We try to plan for consequences, and we do what we can to even ourselves as clients. We try to help ourselves do what we can to be good lawyers. Sometimes that is not being available right when a client wants to talk to us. And that's hard to say, and I don't, it makes me nervous even to say it like that. But I mean, if you can try to plan and your clients, you try to minimize the chances of all that happening.
I would say one thing though, you said something very specific, Bill, is like, there's going to be peaks and valleys. So maybe it's even identifying to the client, during the Pacific times, I'm reachable here. But I know, once we've moved forward with your case and transaction, my hours may extend beyond this point. So maybe even when the piece of hours, when you take on the case, letting the client know up front, this is gonna be my typical time I respond to emails. As we get closer to your trial or the closing of transaction, my window will expand to these hours.
And like
Might work.
establishing, yeah, go ahead, sorry, Bill.
Yeah, it might work. Again, it depends on the client. I mean, I was talking about this with a former colleague yesterday, and she reminded me that, we had some clients who were basically, they wanted answers, but what they really wanted was they wanted to know somebody was handling an issue. And so, we could sometimes expect late night calls, but even a response, got it, we're on it, we'll talk to you in 2 days on this, got it off of their to-do list onto ours, and you roll over and go back to sleep, sort of. But it really depends on the client. And that's part of being a lawyer, is to know how best to meet their needs. And sometimes it's as much as or as little as, hear you, got it, we're going to handle it, and then you go back to your life for a little while. It just really depends.
I actually think that's a great example. I think that often, like I hear that with clients, I hear that with my husband, is sometimes the client is asking for something and particularly earlier in your career, you feel like you have to give it right then. And what in fact it may be is to say, yes, we will get that to you on Wednesday. We got it, right? Like and it depends on the client. Some clients are more difficult than others or have higher expectations than others. But sometimes it's actually just a boundary can actually say, I hear you. And this is like when this thing will be deliverable, or when you can expect to receive this. Or in the beginning of a client relationship can say, this is when I usually am responding to emails. This is what constitutes an emergency. This is when you should, like when things will be escalated. It's hard because every area of law is different, right? And then every workplace is different. So for us to just say, this is exactly how you should handle it is unrealistic. Jesse, I guess I'm just wondering, just not from a client perspective, but from a manager. Like my manager and I are sitting down on our regular weekly check-in or whatever it is, and I want to have a little bit more of a conversation of like, I'm having trouble, Jesse, like I'm having trouble disconnecting. I feel like I am supposed to be answering my emails all the time. My phone is constantly by my bed, and I'm not going to the gym because I worry about missing an email, right? Let's say, what would you want the manager to say? Because I know there are managers on the call. And then two, how could the employee take that a step further and say, this is actually what I need?
Yeah. Well, I will say for managers, again, you set the tone. So if a young attorney, young associate, whatever area of law you're in, sees you never disconnecting, always on vacation, you respond to email, something, that is sending the message that is what is expected of them. So I do think is you have to set the tone. I have one client who manager says, take your lunch break, who encourages it, advocate. I thought you were going on lunch here. Why are you responding to my email? So making sure that you are and make sure you're communicating, not just that you want them, when you see them not, say, hey, I thought you wanted this day off. It's okay. You can get this to me on Monday. I just wanted to send it while it was on my mind. So I think the messaging a manager can send is definitely going to dictate it. And I think for the individual, I think come with a plan. It's not just, well, I think I'm disconnected. I want to have some time away. I'm just not sure. Again, you're given to your manager to decide what your disconnect looks like versus I've identified my caseload. This is what's going on. This is how I think about it. And this is the time slot I was looking at. So making sure you come with a fully developed plan. Be flexible because, again, maybe the manager says, can you push down by an hour? Can you do this? But at least have a plan. Because if you're coming and you're asking your manager, again, depending on who the manager is, they may be supportive, they may not be. But I think having identified what you're gonna do, what it's gonna look like, and ensuring them it's not gonna impact the work.
Thank you.
But having your boundary identified is the key.
And ask and then just communicating it. I'm gonna tangent and then come back, I promise. But it's just, right, this is a boundary conversation. I think a lot of times we don't ask for what we want or need. One, we would have to first identify what it is, and then be able to communicate it, right? We are in a family, my husband's I'm glad he's not watching this. We're in a family chat with his family, talking about the holidays and how we're gonna plan for Christmas. And they chose, we have to go up to 3 or 4 hours away to do this. They're planning for Sunday at 3 o'clock. Not convenient for us at all. And he's getting upset about, why would they plan it at 3? We're doing it on a Sunday? And I was like, did you ask them to move it to 1? And he was like, no. And I was like, well, how do they know that it is inconvenient for us to do this? He was like, well, we live in DC and they live in Pennsylvania. So they know it takes us 3 to 4 hours to get there, and we have kids, right? And I was like, right. But they're not thinking about us, because they're not. That's they think about themselves and what gets their needs met. And so he puts in the chat, actually, we would love to make it, but 1 o'clock would be much better for us. And they said, okay, great, it'll be at 1 o'clock. That was it. But we spent 30 minutes talking about how to have this conversation and how to put it in the chat and what to say, because he didn't want to inconvenience somebody. He didn't want to upset somebody. And it was so simple and so easy. And after he was like, oh, thank you for that. And that's just family, right? That's not work. So I think I want to say that to normalize it, that it is hard, that at 45, he's still figuring it out, right? That it's a process, and it is okay that it is a process. But it is an important one, and you never know what you're going to get. So it is worth asking for. In the last 2 minutes, I want to ask everybody just a quick are there any rituals or habits you might recommend to help shift from work mode mindset and to more of a rest mode mindset when you step away from the office? So something that you do.
I get changed. I mean, and it's funny from the pandemic, because everybody could wear, just pretty comfortable clothes and all. But your workplace was your home. But I actually find things like, oh, if I dress one way for work and then, time to unplug, I'm going to get into sweats, or I'm going to put on fleece or whatever, or I'm going to put on flip-flops. That at least signals to me that something is a little bit different, and again, sort of signaling reminders to oneself, I just think are important. I mean, maybe, if you're not a coffee drinker, or you don't drink warm drinks all day, have a warm drink when it's time to take a break or something. I mean, just almost a little symbolic thing. I think really it helps me. I don't know. Simple minds.
So and this isn't every day because I don't work out every day, but when I do work out, it is after work. So that's a nice, it's just a great way to quiet the mind, come back, I'm exhausted after. And so closes out my day. And then I personally like to put on one of my favorite songs and have a mini little dance party. What? The day is over. And that is how I close out my day sometimes.
But all those are physical reminders, right? Because it's a cue. We're cueing.
Yep.
Anything for you, Jesse?
Well, I'd say I actually do a little bit of both what Bill says and Danielle says sometimes. And sometimes it's the physical aspect of walking outside of my office and closing the door.
Mm-hmm.
I have a home office. I close that door. That door is not getting open unless I left something like my phone, my chapstick, something that I need. Other than that, that door closes and I'm walking out.
Mm-hmm.
And then that is my signal that day's done. Now my evening begins. So is that going to work out? Is that going to cook something? Is that listening to music? But I think just the aspect of just closing down the computer and walking out of the room.
I think those are really important, and acknowledging, and you could do those shifts multiple times, right? Some people stop at 5, but pick back up at 8 or whatever it is to check an email, but then just another transition, right? Every time, let's transition ourselves to remind ourselves, whatever that might look like. Thank you everybody for your time. This is just the reminder. Please feel free to reach out. Sharon had put information in the chat before about the ways to contact us. But we're here to support you, and we appreciate your time. And a big thanks to Bill and Danielle for their time as well.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.